On our family vacation, my son and daughter-in-law completely ignored me for hours, planning their lavish stay. They demanded a penthouse suite at a resort they didn't know I secretly owned. I simply watched, a quiet smile playing on my lips, when their entitlement hit a wall, and a familiar face subtly acknowledged me. I knew my reveal was close. Like, share this story, and tell us where you're listening from. Eleanor Ellie Vance, a woman whose 72 years had etched wisdom around her kind eyes, truly looked forward to this family vacation. It was more than just a trip. It was a desperate, hopeful reach for connection. She longed for the familiar warmth of her son, Julian, and perhaps, just perhaps, a thawing of the icy distance that had persisted with his wife, Cassandra, or Cassie as everyone called her. Ellie pictured laughter, shared meals, and the easy camaraderie that seemed to elude them in their everyday lives. This trip, to the luxurious Ocean View Resort, felt like a last-ditch effort, a carefully planned opportunity to weave herself back into the fabric of their lives. For 5 long years, ever since Julian had married Cassie, Ellie had felt a growing chasm. Cassie, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes, and air of polished perfection, remained an enigma, a beautiful, impenetrable fortress. Ellie had tried, God knows she had, small gifts, invitations to tea, gentle questions about Cassie's day. Each attempt was met with a polite but distant smile, a clipped, "thank you," or a vague excuse. This vacation, Ellie hoped, away from the demands of their busy lives, would finally bridge that gap, allowing her to see the woman Julian loved, and perhaps, for Cassie to see the mother Julian adored. The 4-hour drive to the coastal resort began with a deceptive calm. Ellie sat in the back seat of Julian's sleek SUV, the hum of the engine a backdrop to her quiet optimism. Soon, however, the conversation in the front seat took on a familiar pattern. Julian and Cassie, oblivious to Ellie's presence, discussed their lavish plans for the week ahead. "I saw they have private cabanas by the main pool," Cassie mused, her voice a delicate purr. "We should reserve one for the entire stay, Julian. And the spa package, the full-day immersion, darling. I deserve it after this last quarter." Julian, ever agreeable, nodded, pulling out his phone to check resort apps. Their voices, animated and full of anticipation, painted a picture of luxury and indulgence, a world Ellie felt increasingly excluded from. Ellie cleared her throat gently. "I noticed a lovely little art gallery not far from the resort," she offered, trying to inject herself into their bubble. "Perhaps we could all visit one afternoon? I always enjoy seeing local talent." Cassie turned her head slightly, a fleeting glance in the rearview mirror. "Oh, Mother Vance, you know art isn't really Julian's thing, or mine, for that matter," she replied, her tone polite but dismissive. Julian simply grunted in agreement, scrolling through his phone. A few minutes later, Ellie tried again. They mentioned some wonderful hiking trails nearby. "We could take a morning walk? Enjoy the sea air?" This time, the silence from the front seat was her only answer. The subtle slights, the casual disregard for her presence, stung more deeply than any outright insult. She felt like a phantom, a barely tolerated appendage to their glamorous lives. What Julian and Cassie, in their self-absorbed bubble, could not possibly have known was that the very resort they were discussing with such entitled expectation was one of Ellie's crown jewels. The sprawling Ocean View Resort, with its pristine beaches, gourmet restaurants, and opulent suites, was not merely a destination Ellie had chosen for its amenities. It was a testament to her quiet strength and astute business acumen. It was one of 17 such properties, part of an empire she had painstakingly built from nothing. After her husband, Richard, passed away almost 2 decades ago, leaving her with considerable debt and a fledgling construction company, Ellie had refused to crumble. She had rolled up her sleeves, learned the business from the ground up, diversified, and transformed hardship into an unprecedented success. Her business life, however, had always been a separate entity, a world she deliberately kept hidden from her son. She wanted Julian to love her for herself, for the woman who had nurtured him, read him bedtime stories, and guided him through life's challenges. She dreaded the thought of him seeing her only as a source of wealth, a walking ATM. She'd seen too many families fractured by money, too many relationships corrupted by greed. Her quiet success was her own, a private triumph, and she was fiercely protective of its anonymity, especially from her own flesh and blood. As Julian pulled the SUV under the grand portico of the Ocean View Resort, Cassie practically sprang out of the car. Her smile was brilliant, radiating a polished perfection that seemed to match the resort's luxurious facade. "Finally," she exclaimed, stretching languidly. She turned to Julian, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper, but loud enough for Ellie to hear from the back. "I want the penthouse suite. I don't care what they say about availability. Make it happen, darling." Her tone left no room for negotiation, an imperious demand delivered with the certainty of someone accustomed to getting their way. Julian, to Ellie's quiet dismay, simply nodded obediently. The confident, self-assured boy she had raised, the one who had once debated her fiercely and stood his ground, seemed to have melted into a pliant echo of his wife's desires. He looked at Cassie with a gaze that bordered on adoration, a stark contrast to the dismissive glances he afforded his own mother. It was a painful observation, a fresh wound in Ellie's heart. Inside the stunning lobby, a symphony of marble, glass, and fresh floral arrangements greeted them. Ellie took a moment to appreciate the elegant details, a subtle sense of pride swelling within her. As Julian approached the gleaming mahogany front desk, a woman with warm, intelligent eyes looked up, her name tag identifying her as Maria Rodriguez, front desk manager. Her gaze swept over Julian and Cassie, then paused, briefly, on Ellie. A flicker of recognition crossed Maria's face, a slight widening of her eyes, almost imperceptible. Ellie met her gaze, giving a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent instruction for Maria to maintain the pretense. Not yet. The time wasn't right. Julian, unaware of the silent exchange, puffed out his chest slightly. "Vance, for the penthouse suite, please," he announced, a confident swagger in his voice, mirroring Cassie's earlier demand. Maria, ever professional, tapped away at her keyboard. "Ah, Mr. Vance," she began, her voice smooth and apologetic. "Welcome to the Ocean View. It seems the penthouse is currently occupied. You are confirmed for our deluxe Ocean View suite, with a private balcony, on the 18th floor. It offers breathtaking panoramic views of the coastline." She handed him a keycard packet with a polite smile. Cassie's face, which moments before had glowed with anticipation, darkened instantly. Her jaw tightened, a subtle clenching that Ellie recognized as a telltale sign. Beneath the veneer of her polished composure, a storm of entitlement brewed, threatening to erupt. The thought of not getting exactly what she wanted was clearly an affront, an unacceptable deviation from her meticulously planned, luxurious experience. Ellie watched, a quiet observer. As the first crack appeared in Cassie's perfect facade, the delicate balance of Cassie's composure shattered the moment Maria delivered the news about the penthouse. Her perfectly manicured hand slammed onto the polished counter, the sharp thud echoing in the elegant lobby. "That's unacceptable," she snapped, her voice rising several decibels, piercing the refined atmosphere. "Do you have any idea who we are? I specifically requested the penthouse when we made this reservation. There must be some mistake." Her eyes, usually cool and calculating, now blazed with an entitled fury, directed squarely at the unflappable front desk manager. Maria, a consummate professional, maintained her calm demeanor, her smile remaining polite despite the escalating tension. "I apologize, Mrs. Vance. Our records show a booking for a deluxe Ocean View suite. The penthouse is currently occupied, but the deluxe suites offer unparalleled views and amenities. They are quite lovely, with spacious living areas and—" Cassie cut her off mid-sentence, her voice sharper, laced with undisguised contempt. "I don't want to hear about some inferior room. I want the penthouse, and I want it now. Find a way. I don't care what you have to do. Just make it happen." Ellie, who had been standing a few feet back, watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of discomfort, felt compelled to intervene. The public display was embarrassing, and she felt a sudden surge of protectiveness for Maria, who was clearly doing her job. "Cassie, perhaps we could," she began, stepping forward, hoping to diffuse the situation with a gentle word. Her attempt was met with a brutal, unexpected ferocity. Cassie whirled around, her eyes blazing, and a chilling scream ripped from her throat. "Don't you dare speak." The words hung in the air, sharp and venomous, silencing any other ambient noise in the lobby. Then, Cassie turned back to Maria, her gaze flicking dismissively towards Ellie. "Sarah, or whatever your name is, don't listen to anything this old woman says. She's nobody important. She's just the help we brought along." The words struck Ellie with the force of a physical blow. The grand, welcoming lobby, moments before a picture of understated luxury, suddenly felt like an arena. The murmuring conversations ceased. The clinking of glasses from the lounge area faded. A suffocating silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the rapid thumping of Ellie's own heart. She felt a cold wave of humiliation wash over her as she became acutely aware of the sudden, intense focus of every eye in the room. Other guests, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity, stared and whispered behind cupped hands. Ellie's cheeks burned, and a profound sense of shame, entirely undeserved, consumed her. But Cassie wasn't finished. She extended a perfectly manicured finger, pointing directly at Ellie, as if she were an inconvenient piece of furniture. "Don't talk to the old woman," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's just the maid, the babysitter we hired for the trip. Don't waste your time with her. She gets confused easily." Ellie stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. Her mouth was dry, a metallic taste coating her tongue. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of shock and disbelief. The help, the maid, the babysitter, the venomous disrespect, the callous dismissal of her entire being, rendered her utterly speechless. She had braced herself for Cassie's usual coldness, her subtle snubs, but this blatant, public humiliation was a new, crueler level of assault. What cut deeper, what truly twisted the knife in Ellie's gut, was Julian's reaction. Her son, her only child, the boy she had raised with boundless love and unwavering support, did not intercede. He did not defend her. Instead, he threw back his head and laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle, or a feigned laugh to appease his wife. It was a genuine, delighted burst of laughter, echoing through the stunned silence of the lobby. He found it amusing. Her humiliation, his mother's public degradation, was a source of amusement for him. Julian clutched his stomach, wiping tears from the corners of his eyes, his face flushed with mirth. "Oh God, Cassie, you're terrible." He choked out between laughs, catching his breath. "But you're not wrong." He then turned to Ellie, his smile still wide, utterly oblivious to the raw pain etched on her face. "Mom, just let us handle this, okay? Go sit down somewhere. We'll be with you in a minute." The casual dismissal, the implicit confirmation of Cassie's cruel words, was more than just a betrayal. It was a physical blow. For him, for Julian, she had sacrificed everything after Richard's death. Her youth, her personal life, countless sleepless nights building a legacy that she had hoped would one day provide for him and his family. And this was her reward. Maria, who had witnessed the entire brutal exchange, was pale with shock and a deep, empathetic sympathy. Her professional composure wavered slightly, her gaze flickering from Cassie's sneering triumph to Ellie's frozen devastation. Quietly, her voice barely a whisper, she offered, "Madam, perhaps you'd like to take a seat in the lounge area? We can send a bellman for your luggage." Cassie, with an exaggerated sigh of exasperation, chimed in, cementing Ellie's public shame. "Yes, take the old bat somewhere. She won't embarrass us further, and make sure someone keeps an eye on her. She tends to wander off." More laughter, this time from Julian, and a few awkward coughs from the lingering guests, punctuated her cruel remarks. Despite the fresh wave of humiliation, despite the burning shame and the searing pain of her son's betrayal, something shifted within Ellie. A spark, small but insistent, ignited deep within her. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and with a dignity that belied the fresh wounds to her heart, she walked to where her modest suitcase sat near the bell desk. She picked it up herself, refusing the offer of assistance, and walked towards the elevators. As the doors began to slide shut, she caught Maria's eye. The front desk manager gave her a subtle, understanding nod. A silent acknowledgement of the injustice that had just transpired. As the elevator ascended, carrying Ellie away from the laughter and the stares, her deep hurt began to transform. The searing pain, the raw humiliation, slowly cooled, crystallizing into something sharper, harder. It was a cold determination and resolve that tightened her jaw and hardened her gaze. The old Ellie, the one who had tried so desperately to connect, the one who had silently endured years of neglect and casual disrespect, was gone. In her place, a different woman was emerging, one who was ready to remind them, in no uncertain terms, just who the old woman truly was. The morning sun streamed through the expansive windows of Ellie's deluxe ocean view suite, painting the room in a soft, golden glow. The vista was breathtaking. The endless expanse of the azure ocean, the gentle curve of the coastline, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. It was a view many would pay a fortune for. A perfect tableau of peace. Yet, despite its beauty, Ellie felt hollow. The previous evening's public humiliation, Cassie's venomous screams, and Julian's delighted laughter echoed in her mind, a discordant symphony haunting her quiet solitude. The images replayed relentlessly. Cassie's pointing finger, Julian wiping tears of amusement from his eyes. The stares of strangers. It had been more than just an insult. It was a profound betrayal, leaving a gaping wound in her heart. A sharp rap on the door startled her from her melancholic reverie. It was Julian, dressed in crisp linen shorts and a resort-branded polo shirt. He looked slightly uncomfortable, avoiding her gaze as he spoke. But there was no apology in his voice or his stance. His face was devoid of the remorse Ellie desperately hoped to see. "Mom, we're heading down to breakfast," he announced, his tone clipped and businesslike, as if delivering an itinerary. "Cassie wants you to watch the kids by the pool afterwards so we can go to the spa. Our appointment is at 10. Ellie felt a fresh wave of hurt, but she swallowed it down. "Julian," she began, her voice carefully modulated. About last night, Julian waved a dismissive hand, cutting her off impatiently. "Mom, don't make a big deal out of nothing. Cassie was just stressed with the travel and the room mix-up. That's just Cassie being dramatic. You know how she gets." He offered a strained, dismissive smile, clearly hoping to brush the incident under the rug, to pretend it hadn't happened, or at least that it wasn't significant enough to warrant discussion. "She called me the maid, Julian," Ellie insisted, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "She screamed at me in front of strangers. In front of Maria, who works here." She searched his face, desperate for some flicker of recognition, some acknowledgement of the profound disrespect. Julian shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes darting away to focus on a distant point in the hallway. He cleared his throat, a clear sign of his internal conflict. But the conflict was brief. He clearly chose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity, his loyalty, or perhaps his fear, overriding any filial obligation. "Look, Mom, it's a new day. Let's just try to enjoy the vacation, all right? For the kids' sake." His tone was flat, final. Ellie stared at him, the bitterness rising like bile in her throat. The chasm between them felt wider than ever, an unbridgeable canyon of indifference. Keeping the peace, she realized, was paramount, if only to salvage any semblance of family cohesion, however fragile. With a heavy heart, she nodded. "All right, Julian. I'll watch Lily and Owen." At breakfast, the tension was palpable, at least for Ellie. Julian and Cassie sat at the best table on the outdoor terrace, overlooking the sparkling ocean. Cassie, radiating an air of imperious entitlement, was already instructing their server, Daniel Perez, about her order. "My orange juice must be freshly squeezed, no pulp, and served in a chilled glass. And the scrambled eggs, make sure they're light and fluffy, almost creamy, not dry, understand?" Daniel, a young man with a weary but polite demeanor, simply nodded, making notes. Ellie watched as Cassie, without even a glance in her direction, delicately picked at a pastry. Ellie reached out, a maternal instinct, to smooth a stray strand of blonde hair from Lily's face. Lily, engrossed in a vibrant game on her tablet, barely registered the gesture. But Cassie did. Her hand shot out, blocking Ellie's. "Don't touch her," she said, her voice sharp, barely above a whisper, yet carrying a chilling finality. "She just had her hair done yesterday, and I don't want it messed up." Lily and Owen, 10 and 8 respectively, were glued to their tablets, their faces illuminated by the glowing screens. They ate their pancakes in silence, their world seemingly confined to the digital realms of their games, barely acknowledging Ellie's presence, let alone her attempts at interaction. Cassie, seemingly satisfied with Ellie's quiet compliance, launched into a barrage of instructions. "Now, for the pool, Mother Vance. Sunscreen every hour. Without fail. SPF 50. No deep end, even if Owen says he's a strong swimmer. No poolside snacks, they'll spoil their lunch. And call immediately for anything at all. Don't try to handle it yourself." Her words were a torrent of commands, delivered with the precision of a drill sergeant, leaving Ellie feeling less like a grandmother and more like a hired hand. When Cassie finally paused, Ellie ventured a question. "And when should I expect you back?" Cassie's eyes, cold and unwavering, met hers. "As long as we want. This is our vacation, not yours. You're here to help, remember?" Julian, spooning scrambled eggs onto his plate, remained utterly silent, his gaze fixed on his food, a clear endorsement of his wife's cruel words. Later, by the bustling pool, the vibrant energy of children splashing and laughter echoing through the air did little to lift Ellie's spirits. She sat on a sun lounger, her eyes scanning the pool, diligently watching Lily and Owen, who were now splashing near the shallow end. She applied sunscreen to their small shoulders, despite their squirming protests, precisely as instructed. Then, Lily, seemingly out of nowhere, swam over to the edge, her small face earnest. "Grandma," she asked, her voice hushed, "Mom says you used to clean houses for rich people. Is that true?" Her innocent eyes searched Ellie's, a flicker of genuine curiosity in their depths. Ellie's breath hitched. She felt a familiar burn of anger, but quickly suppressed it, choosing gentleness. "No, honey," she replied softly, stroking Lily's wet hair back from her forehead. "That's not true. I own businesses. I build hotels, actually." She offered a small, reassuring smile, hoping to dispel the fabricated image. Just then, Owen, who had been floating nearby, looked up from his tablet for the first time that morning, his young face surprisingly serious. "Mom says," he added, his voice flat, repeating a learned phrase, "you make up stories about being important because you're embarrassed about being poor." The words hung in the air, a devastating blow. Ellie's heart sank, a sickening realization dawning upon her. It wasn't just Cassie's direct insults. It was something far more insidious. Cassie had been systematically poisoning her grandchildren against her, whispering lies, painting her as pathetic, delusional, and someone to be pitied or even mocked. The chasm wasn't just between her and Cassie, or even between her and Julian. It extended to her grandchildren, infecting their young minds with a false narrative designed to alienate them from their own grandmother. The profound sadness of this discovery eclipsed even the previous day's humiliation. This was a deeper, more personal form of cruelty, a calculated destruction of her place in their family. The afternoon sun blazed relentlessly, as Ellie spent 6 agonizing hours by the pool. She watched over Lily and Owen, who remained absorbed in their digital worlds, oblivious to the vibrant life around them, and more importantly, to her existence. Ellie tried to engage them, pointing out a particularly graceful dolphin leaping in the distant ocean, or suggesting a game of I Spy. Their responses were monosyllabic grunts, or fleeting, irritated glances, before their eyes returned to their screens. To pass the time, Ellie made polite small talk with other guests, feigning a casual enjoyment of her vacation while a deep ache settled in her chest. Julian and Cassie finally reappeared as the sun began its descent, their skin glowing from spa treatments, their smiles wide from an expensive, leisurely lunch. They looked refreshed, radiant, and utterly unconcerned. "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver," Julian said breezily, barely making eye contact as he gathered the children's towels. "We're planning to hit the golf course tomorrow morning, early tea time. So, if you wouldn't mind watching the kids again?" It was not a request, but an expectation, a casual instruction delivered without a hint of gratitude. Alone in her opulent suite that night, overlooking the very ocean she owned, a crushing realization settled over Ellie. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't family enjoying a much-needed break. She was an unpaid babysitter on what was supposedly a family work trip, a euphemism for their extravagant vacation. And worse, she was paying for the privilege of being treated like dirt, lied about, and systematically excluded. The irony was a bitter pill. She was literally funding their opulent getaway, enduring their cruelty, all while they assumed she was a destitute old woman. The deep hurt that had gnawed at her for days finally transformed into something else entirely. A pure, clean, unyielding anger. It wasn't the volatile, destructive kind of rage, but a cold, resolute fury at being taken for granted, lied about, and treated as nothing. The quiet, accommodating Ellie, who had always prioritized keeping the peace, was gone. Tomorrow, she whispered to the darkening ocean, her voice firm with a newfound conviction. Tomorrow, things were going to start changing. The third day dawned with a renewed sense of purpose for Ellie. But for Cassie, it was business as usual. As Ellie joined them for breakfast, Cassie rattled off the day's itinerary with her usual imperious air. Julian and I are going to wine country today. A full day of tastings, darling. You know how I love a good Cabernet. So, Mother Vance, you'll be with the children again. The kids' club opens at 9. Just drop them off. And pick them up before dinner. Don't be late. There was no softening, no pretense of a request. It was an order, delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who believed she held all the power. As Cassie finished her dictate, her phone buzzed. She excused herself, stepping away from the table, but not far enough. Ellie, her senses heightened by her newfound resolve, overheard fragments of the conversation. No, we can't do dinner tonight, Cassie was saying, her voice laced with an audible sigh of exasperation. I'm stuck babysitting duty again. Once this is all sorted out, we won't have to deal with this anymore. A cold dread settled in Ellie's stomach. Stuck babysitting duty? Once this is all sorted out? The words were vague, yet sinister, sending an unpleasant shiver down her spine. After breakfast, Ellie dutifully took Lily and Owen to the hotel's elaborate kids' club, a vibrant space teeming with games, crafts, and enthusiastic counselors. She left them there, their faces once again glued to their tablets, seemingly unconcerned by her departure. Instead of returning to her room, Ellie decided to walk the property, not as the owner, but as a discerning guest. She observed the staff, the cleanliness, the subtle details of the landscaping, all the elements she had poured her life into perfecting. Her observations were sharp, critical, yet laced with an undeniable pride. As she strolled past a secluded section of private cabanas, tucked away behind lush tropical foliage, familiar voices drifted towards her. Julian's low chuckle, Cassie's distinctive high-pitched laugh. Wine country. A jolt of suspicion shot through her. They were here, at the resort. Hushed tones, punctuated by laughter, drew her closer. She paused, concealed by a thick hibiscus bush, and peered through the leaves. There they were, Julian and Cassie, ensconced in a plush cabana with another couple, drinks in hand, their faces relaxed and animated. Cassie's voice, now clearer, carried on the gentle sea breeze. The thing is, she's getting old, and old people don't live forever, if you know what I mean. She punctuated the sentence with a knowing wink to her companions. Julian is an only child, so everything will come to us eventually. The question is just how long we have to wait. Ellie's blood ran cold, her heart plummeted, a painful abyss opening in her chest. They were discussing her death. Her demise, treated as a mere inconvenience, a waiting game for their inheritance. Then Julian spoke, his voice tinged with cruel amusement. Mom, God, no. She's broke as hell, lives in this tiny apartment, barely gets by on Social Security. I've been supporting her for years. The lie, so brazen and utterly false, hung in the air, thick with their contempt. Ellie, who had anonymously paid for their lavish lifestyle, their designer clothes, their expensive cars, their children's private school, was being painted as a penniless burden. Cassie continued. She's like a pathetic pet that you can't get rid of. Honestly, if she ever became sick or inconvenient, I'd send her straight to a state facility. No way am I dealing with that. The words, so chillingly devoid of humanity, made Ellie's stomach churn. Julian, apparently delighted by his wife's callousness, added with a cruel chuckle, "She still thinks she's important. It's really quite sad, isn't it? She tells these ridiculous stories about owning businesses and being successful. Yesterday, she even tried to tell the kids she owns hotels." Hotels? Can you imagine? Their laughter, a harsh, grating sound, followed his words, discussing her death, her perceived poverty, and her future abandonment, as if she were a character in a morbid comedy. The sound cut through Ellie like broken glass, each shard piercing deeper into her already fractured heart. Cassie then confirmed Ellie's earlier suspicion, her voice smug. "We only brought her along to watch the kids so we could have some fun. Honestly, she's a complete drain on our resources." The ultimate lie, uttered with such casual cruelty, solidified Ellie's resolve. She was a drain on their resources, despite paying all their bills, despite funding their very existence. Ellie stumbled back, the weight of their words crushing her. She retreated silently, unseen, her mind reeling, her body trembling. She made it back to her room, the luxurious haven now feeling like a solitary prison. The dam finally broke, and tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless. They weren't just tears of hurt, they were tears of profound realization. Her son, her daughter-in-law, the very people she had loved and nurtured, saw her as nothing more than a worthless burden, an obstacle to their desired future, a pitiful, delusional old woman, to be discarded. But the tears soon gave way to something else, a cold, hard resolve. Their game of deception was about to end, and a new game, one she controlled, was about to begin. If you're finding yourself gripped by this story, remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for what happens next. You won't want to miss the shocking twists to come. The phone's sudden ring startled Ellie, yanking her from the dark spiral of her thoughts. She had been sitting motionless on the edge of her bed, the echoes of Julian and Cassie's cruel laughter still ringing in her ears, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on her. She picked up the receiver, her voice tight. "Hello, Mrs. Vance? This is Maria Rodriguez from the front desk." The polite voice on the other end said, "I just wanted to check in on you. After yesterday, well, I was concerned. Is everything all right?" Maria's voice was soft, laced with genuine warmth and concern, a stark contrast to the callous indifference Ellie had experienced from her own family. Maria's simple kindness, coming from someone who was essentially a stranger, was like a cool balm on Ellie's raw wounds. In that moment, Ellie realized with a painful clarity just how starved she had become for basic human decency. For a touch of genuine empathy. It was a small gesture, yet it resonated deeply, reminding her that not everyone in her world was cruel or self-serving. A subtle shift happened within Ellie. The paralyzing pain began to recede, replaced by a surge of clarity and a quiet strength. She took a deep, steadying breath, the first one that hadn't felt like a struggle in days. "Actually, Maria," Ellie began, her voice gaining a surprising firmness, "there is something you can do for me. Something very important." She paused, collecting her thoughts, a plan beginning to crystallize in her mind. "I need you to prepare a detailed record of all the charges to my son's room, Julian Vance. Everything. Every meal, every spa service, every incidental charge. I want a complete accounting, from the moment they checked in until now." Maria's voice registered a hint of surprise, but her professionalism quickly took over. "Of course, Mrs. Vance. I can have that prepared for you. Is there a particular reason?" Ellie allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Let's just say," she replied, her voice cryptic yet resolute, "I'm beginning to see some things more clearly than I have in a long time. Some rather expensive things." Later that evening, Julian and Cassie returned, their faces flushed with sun and satisfaction from their day of deception at Wine Country, which Ellie now knew was merely a cabana down the beach. They were utterly oblivious that Ellie had overheard their cruel plans, their cold assessment of her worth, and their eagerness for her demise. Their smiles were genuine, their laughter light, a testament to their self-absorbed world. Julian, ever the performer, called out as he entered the suite, a practiced look of casual concern on his face. "Mom, how was your day? I hope the kids weren't too much trouble at the club." Ellie, her inner storm carefully concealed, met his gaze with a steady, serene expression. "They were perfect angels, Julian. Lily even made a lovely drawing for me." She turned to Cassie, her smile unwavering. "We had a lovely time at the kids' club, didn't we, children?" The children, predictably, grunted non-committally from their tablets. Cassie, barely listening, was already consulting her phone. "Great. Good. You don't mind staying in tonight, do you, Mother Vance?" she announced, her tone assuming agreement. "Julian and I have dinner plans downtown. The kids need to get to bed early anyway after all that excitement at the club." She didn't wait for a reply, already turning to Julian to discuss restaurant reservations. Ellie simply nodded, excusing herself quietly. She walked into her bedroom, closed the door, and pulled out her phone. It was time to make another call. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a number she hadn't needed to call for personal matters in years. Arthur Sterling, her business attorney of 15 years. "Arthur, it's Ellie Vance," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt. "I have a hypothetical question for you." She then laid out a scenario, carefully constructed to sound detached. If, hypothetically, someone were fraudulently using credit cards linked to my accounts, without my explicit knowledge or permission, what would be the legal recourse? And what if these individuals were family members? Arthur, a shrewd and meticulous lawyer, listened patiently. There was a pause on the line before he responded, his voice grave. "Ellie, that's a very serious criminal matter. Fraud, potentially grand theft, depending on the amounts. Even with family members, the law takes a very dim view of such actions." "Are you telling me this is what's happening?" Ellie closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. "I'm telling you, Arthur. I'm tired of being taken advantage of. And I want to know my options. Every single one." She heard the steel in her own voice, a strength she hadn't known she still possessed. After her call with Arthur, Ellie felt a renewed sense of purpose. She picked up her phone and called Maria again. "Maria, it's Ellie Vance. I have one more request, if you don't mind. For a comprehensive report. I need details on every service requested, every special request made, every staff interaction by Julian's family, from their check-in until tonight. I want to see if there are any patterns, any irregularities. Let's call it a quality assessment for my records." Maria, ever efficient, responded immediately. "Consider it done, Mrs. Vance. I'll have a detailed report on your desk by morning." Hanging up, Ellie looked out at the twinkling lights of the resort, at the vast, dark ocean beyond. For the first time in days, the suffocating weight of helplessness had lifted. She wasn't just grieving a lost son and a broken family. She was preparing for a battle. And she would fight it with every ounce of the strength that had built this empire from scratch. The seeds of retribution had been sown, and now, it was time to watch them grow. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the storm brewing within Ellie. At precisely 7 a.m., she met Maria Rodriguez in her discreet office, a functional space tucked away behind the bustling front desk. The comprehensive report Maria had promised lay open on the desk, a thick binder filled with meticulously documented complaints, charges, and staff interactions. Maria, her face somber, began to summarize. "Mrs. Vance, your daughter-in-law, Cassie, has made 17 separate complaints since her arrival, ranging from trivial matters to outright demands. She's demanded multiple room upgrades, despite being in one of our best suites, and insisted on highly specific, often impossible, meal preparations for every dining experience." Maria paused, her lips tightening. "She has also been quite rude to several of our staff members, Ellie flipped through the pages, her gaze hardening with each entry. There were detailed accounts of Cassie berating a young housekeeper for a misplaced decorative pillow, sending back exquisitely prepared meals with scathing remarks, and even demanding the main pool be cleared of other guests for Lily and Owen to swim in private, citing privacy concerns and germ phobia. It was a meticulously compiled record of entitlement and profound disrespect, a testament to Cassie's true character. Regarding Julian, Maria's expression remained carefully neutral, betraying no personal opinion. Mr. Vance has been less directly involved in the complaints, she stated, but he has consistently supported his wife in every single demand and complaint she has made, often reinforcing her arguments and intimidating staff when she was not satisfied. It was clear Julian was not an innocent bystander, but an active, if quieter, participant in the abuse. Maria then leaned forward, her voice lowering. There's also something else, Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance has been quite vocal about her opinions regarding the hotel's management. We've had reports of her telling another guest that the ownership was probably some old money family who didn't care about quality anymore, and that she could run this place better if she were given the chance. She even suggested she knew exactly what the place needed to improve its ratings. A wry, almost pitying, look crossed Maria's face. Ellie simply nodded, her jaw tight. The reports confirmed everything she had suspected, everything she had overheard. The depth of Cassie's malice and Julian's spineless complicity was laid bare. She closed the binder, the weight of the information settling heavy in her hands. As Ellie walked towards the elevator, her mind still reeling from the revelations, she encountered Daniel Perez, the young server who had endured Cassie's breakfast demands. Daniel glanced nervously around the deserted hallway, then quietly approached her. Mrs. Vance, he began, his voice hushed. Excuse me for speaking out of turn, but we all know who you are, ma'am. Most of us. Anyway, his eyes held a mixture of respect and concern, and watching how they talk to you. How they treat you like you're, well, like you're nobody important. It doesn't sit right with any of us. You've always been so good to us, to this place. Ellie felt a surprising warmth spread through her chest. It was a small act of solidarity, a quiet rebellion against the injustice. Touched by his loyalty and courage, she offered him a genuine, albeit faint, smile. Thank you, Daniel. That means a great deal to me. She leaned in slightly. Continue to provide excellent service to my son's family. But I also need you, and anyone else you trust, to document everything, every word, every action, every complaint. Daniel nodded, his gaze firm with understanding. Over the next 2 days, Ellie observed Julian and Cassie with a calculating, almost scientific eye. The facade of family faded entirely. She saw not just casual neglect, but Cassie's profound, almost pathological cruelty, and Julian's eager, sickeningly devoted complicity in every barbed comment, every dismissive gesture. They continued their self-indulgent spree, leaving Lily and Owen in Ellie's care, extending their spa treatments, their golfing, their wine country excursions. The breaking point, the final, irrevocable crack in Ellie's resolve, arrived on the third afternoon. The children were playing by the shallow end of the pool, Ellie watching from her sun lounger, when Lily, distracted, tripped and scraped her knee on the rough concrete. Her cries were immediate, sharp with pain and fright. Before Ellie could even reach her, Cassie, who had been lounging nearby, sprang up. But instead of rushing to comfort her daughter, she launched into a furious tirade. She berated the nearby lifeguard, accusing him of negligence, demanding to know why the area wasn't safer. Then, she whirled on Ellie, her eyes blazing. "This is your fault!" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the pool deck. "If you had been paying attention, if you weren't always so useless, this wouldn't have happened." Ellie, ignoring Cassie's venom, knelt by Lily, whose small face was contorted in pain and tears. She gently wiped the blood from her knee, murmuring soothing words. As Ellie cleaned the wound, Lily, sniffling, looked up at her, her eyes wide and innocent. "Grandma Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why doesn't Mommy like you? The innocent question, born of a child's raw perception, pierced Ellie's heart. Before she could even attempt an answer, Cassie's voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the air once more. "Lily, get away from her right now. I told you not to get too attached to Grandma. She won't be around much longer anyway." The words were delivered with a chilling finality, a casual dismissal of Ellie's very existence, even in front of her own granddaughter. That night, alone in her suite, the memory of Lily's question and Cassie's callous remark echoed in Ellie's mind. It was the final straw, the casual cruelty, the deliberate poisoning of her grandchildren's minds, the open declaration of her impending irrelevance. It all coalesced into a fierce, unwavering determination. Ellie picked up her phone. She made a series of rapid, decisive calls. First, to Arthur Sterling, her attorney, with specific, unambiguous instructions. Then, to her accountant, detailing immediate financial actions. And finally, to Michael Chen, the general manager of her entire hotel chain. Not just this resort. Issuing orders that would send ripples through her vast organization. She walked to the bathroom, switched on the light, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman worn by grief, by betrayal, and by years of subtle, insidious abuse. But she also saw something new, something resolute. Her eyes, though shadowed, held a steely glint. Her chin, once softly rounded, was now firm. She saw power, and the absolute determination to use it. The quiet grandmother was gone. The formidable businesswoman, the empire builder, was about to make her grand and final appearance. The final day of their vacation arrived, bright and cloudless, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. Cassie, ever the planner of grand gestures, had booked the hotel's most exclusive private dining room, the Sunset Terrace, for a farewell dinner. She was utterly oblivious to the meticulous plans Ellie had laid, the intricate web of retribution quietly being woven beneath her very nose. At breakfast, Cassie, radiating an air of self-importance, rattled off the names of the influential guests she had managed to invite to their dinner. She then turned to Julian, and with a dismissive wave of her hand, added, "Mom, you'll be able to keep the kids entertained during dinner, right? They get restless during adult conversations, and I certainly don't want them interrupting tonight." It was another casual slight, another expectation of unpaid servitude. Ellie simply smiled, a serene, almost predatory smile that went unnoticed. At precisely 3 p.m., Ellie's phone buzzed. It was Detective Reynolds. "Mrs. Vance." The detective's voice was crisp and professional. "We've reviewed the financial documents you provided, and the evidence is compelling. We're ready to proceed whenever you are." Ellie's heart gave a slight thud, a mixture of apprehension and grim satisfaction. "Thank you, Detective," she replied, her voice steady. "I'll call you when it's time." At 7 p.m., the guests gathered in the spectacular Sunset Terrace, a room adorned with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the ocean. Cassie, draped in a shimmering gown, played the gracious hostess, introducing Julian to their invited friends and acquaintances. When it came to Ellie, Cassie merely gestured vaguely in her direction. "Everyone," she announced with a dismissive wave, her tone condescending. "This is Julian's mother. She's been helping us with the children this week." Ellie, seated with Lily and Owen, met the fleeting, polite glances of the guests with a calm smile, biding her time. The exquisite meal progressed, a symphony of gourmet dishes and fine wines. Cassie held court, her laughter tinkling, regaling the table with exaggerated anecdotes about their lavish vacation and thinly veiled complaints about the lack of attention from the hotel staff. Julian, ever the devoted husband, hung on her every word, nodding in agreement, reinforcing her narrative. Ellie, meanwhile, engaged Lily and Owen in quiet conversation, encouraging them to try new foods, her mind racing, anticipating the perfect moment. During a lull in the conversation, as dessert was being served, Cassie turned to Ellie, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes barely meeting Ellie's, "could you take the children out to the balcony? They're getting a bit restless, and I'd hate for them to disturb everyone's meal. You know how important these adult conversations are." This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. Ellie stood slowly, deliberately, the subtle movement commanding attention. She walked calmly to Cassie's chair, stopping directly beside her, her shadow falling over Cassie's perfectly coiffed blonde hair. Her voice, though low, was clear and resonant, cutting through the refined chatter. "Actually, Cassie," Ellie stated, her gaze unwavering, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation, all of us." Cassie's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of annoyance and confusion. "What are you talking about, Mother Vance? I asked you to take the children outside." "Don't be difficult." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "I know what you asked," she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "Just like I know about your conversation by the pool cabana 3 days ago, the one where you discussed how long you think I have to live, and how happy you'll be when I'm dead." Cassie's face went from pale to ghostly white, her jaw slackened, then snapped shut. She forced a brittle, unconvincing laugh. "Eleanor, darling, you're being ridiculous. What on earth are you talking about? And your plans," Ellie continued, relentless, "to send me to a state facility if I ever became inconvenient. Your claims that I'm broke, that Julian has been supporting me for years. And your mockery of my ridiculous stories about owning businesses and hotels." Julian, who had been listening with growing horror, now stared at his mother in wide-eyed panic, his face visibly paling. Julian finally found his voice, a desperate croak. "Mom, please, this isn't the place. Let's discuss this in private." Ellie turned to him, her eyes cold. "Oh, I think we've had enough private discussions, Julian. I think it's time for some public truth." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick folder, its contents neatly organized. She then addressed the entire table, her voice ringing with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eleanor Vance, and I am the owner and founder of Vance Hospitality Group. This hotel, the Ocean View Resort, where you are currently enjoying your evening, is one of 17 properties in my portfolio." A collective gasp filled the silent room. Forks clattered onto plates. Eyes widened in disbelief and shock. Cassie looked as if she might faint. Julian's mouth hung open, his face a mask of utter horror. Ellie continued, her voice unwavering. "For the past week, I have been systematically humiliated, belittled, and treated like hired help by my own son, Julian Vance, and his wife, Cassandra." She laid out the documents from the folder. The official deeds to the resort, the corporate registration papers for Vance Hospitality Group, a printout showing her net worth of $47 million. Then, with a chilling precision, she placed a detailed bank statement on the table. "And here," she announced, "is a record of the $68,000 in fraudulent charges made by Julian and Cassie over the past 6 months, using credit cards linked to my accounts." She looked at Julian and Cassie, her gaze burning with an intensity that made them flinch. "You called me a maid. You poisoned my grandchildren against me, telling them I was a delusional, poor old woman. You openly planned my abandonment, and you profited from my supposed weakness." Julian, shaking visibly, stammered, "Mom, please, this is a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake." Ellie didn't give him a chance to finish. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Detective Reynolds? It's Eleanor Vance. You can come in now. The time has come." The doors to the Sunset Terrace opened, and Detective Reynolds, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers, stepped into the stunned silence of the dining room. The sight of them sent a fresh wave of horror through Julian and Cassie. Their elaborate scheme, their cruel lies, had just come crashing down around them, publicly and irrevocably. The grand Sunset Terrace, moments ago filled with the clinking of glasses and polite chatter, was now a tableau of stunned silence and escalating chaos. Cassie's shriek pierced the air, a raw, almost feral sound of disbelief. "You called the police on your own family, you monster!" she screamed, her perfectly coiffed hair disheveled, her face contorted with rage. Ellie met her gaze, her own eyes cold and unwavering. "I called the police. Cassie," she corrected, her voice calm amidst the storm, "on people who have been defrauding me. Fraud is not a family affair. It's a crime." Julian, his hands trembling visibly, stumbled forward, his previous panic now morphing into a desperate plea. "Mom, please, Think about what you're doing. Think about the children. You can't do this." He looked around at the rapidly emptying tables, the horrified faces of their former friends making a hasty retreat. Ellie's gaze softened momentarily as she looked at her grandchildren, Lily and Owen, who were now clinging to each other, terrified and confused. "You should have thought about the children, Julian," she retorted, her voice tinged with deep sorrow. "Before you taught them to despise their grandmother, before you taught them that their own grandmother was a worthless, pathetic old woman." As the last of the dinner guests fled the scene, leaving behind a scattering of abandoned napkins and half-eaten desserts, Cassie made one last desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. Her voice, though still laced with fury, now held a hint of calculated desperation. "You're making a huge mistake, Eleanor, a colossal mistake. We're your family. We're all you have left. If you do this, you'll be alone forever." "Do you want to die alone?" Ellie looked at her, then out at the dark, vast ocean she owned. A profound sense of complete and utter peace settled over her. A quiet strength that transcended the pain. "Cassie," she replied, her voice resonating with a quiet authority that silenced the younger woman. "I've been alone for years. The only difference is that now I'm choosing it, and it feels remarkably freeing." At that moment, Detective Reynolds stepped fully into the room, his gaze sweeping over Julian and Cassie. "Julian and Cassandra Vance," he stated, his voice firm. "You are under arrest for credit card fraud and financial elder abuse." As the officers moved to cuff Cassie, Julian's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. He snarled at Ellie, his face contorted with pure hatred. "You vindictive old bitch. You're destroying this family over money." His hateful words, rather than weakening Ellie's resolve, solidified it. There was no going back, no family left to save. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the meticulously documented financial records, Maria's detailed reports, and the testimony of multiple hotel staff, Julian and Cassie had little choice but to accept a plea agreement. They pleaded guilty to multiple counts of credit card fraud and financial elder abuse, avoiding a lengthy trial but facing significant legal repercussions. The local newspapers, always eager for a juicy story involving wealth and betrayal, picked up on the case with relish. "Hotel Empress uncovers family fraud," one headline blared, while another proclaimed, "Vance Hospitality Group owner exposes son's scheme." The articles detailed their deception, painting an accurate, if unflattering, picture of Julian and Cassie's years of abuse and entitlement, a public shaming that stripped them of their carefully curated social standing. The immediate consequences were swift and devastating for the couple. Julian and Cassie were not only banned from all Vance Hospitality properties nationwide, but also found their personal credit cards, linked to Ellie's accounts, immediately canceled. Ellie, with a clean sweep, also stopped making the mortgage payments on their lavish home, leaving them no choice but to sell it to avoid foreclosure. Their illusion of wealth crumbled. Their carefully cultivated social circles dissolved almost overnight. Country club memberships were swiftly revoked, invitations ceased, and the elite private school tuition for Lily and Owen, once secretly paid by Ellie, was no longer funded. The children were forced to transfer to public school, a stark adjustment for them. Julian and Cassie found themselves ostracized, their lives of luxury replaced by the harsh realities of their own making. 3 months later, a letter arrived for Ellie. It was from Cassie, a long, rambling missive filled with manipulative pleas, feigned remorse, and carefully crafted mentions of how much the children miss their grandma. Ellie read it, her expression unreadable. She recognized it for what it was, another calculated attempt to regain access to her resources. She never responded. The chapter was closed. Ellie, however, was not one to dwell on the past. With a renewed sense of purpose, she sold 2 of her smaller, less profitable properties. The proceeds, a substantial sum, were used to establish the Vance Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to preventing elder abuse and providing support for victims. It became her new passion, her new legacy. The foundation quickly became her real family. Dr. Patricia Chen, a renowned gerontologist, joined as the executive director, bringing expertise and compassion. James Sullivan, a sharp legal mind, offered his services pro bono, fighting for the rights of the vulnerable. And Maria Rodriguez, now promoted to regional manager of Vance Hospitality, became a trusted confidant and board member, ensuring the foundation always had a safe space within Ellie's hotels for those in need. Together, they built a powerful force for good, helping dozens of seniors reclaim their lives, their dignity, and their futures. Ellie, once alone, now found herself surrounded by genuine respect, admiration, and love, building a legacy far richer than any material empire. Even in the whirlwind of establishing the Vance Foundation and navigating the legal aftermath, Ellie never forgot about Lily and Owen. She might have cut ties with their parents, but her love for her grandchildren remained steadfast. Through Arthur Sterling, she discreetly established trust funds for both Lily and Owen's college educations to be administered by the foundation when they each turned 18. It was a silent promise of a future, a safety net untainted by their parents' actions. A year after the dramatic confrontation at the Ocean View Resort, Maria Rodriguez, now deservedly promoted to general manager of the very hotel, visited Ellie in her penthouse office. "Mrs. Vance," Maria began, a warm smile on her face. "The staff still talks about that night. It's become a legend. Everyone admires your grace and courage." Maria then shared something surprising. "We've had several guests, after hearing snippets of your story, discreetly inquiring about programs for seniors who faced similar family situations. They see this resort, and your story, as a beacon of hope." Maria's words sparked a new idea in Ellie's ever-active mind. The Vance Foundation's mission was broad, but this specific need resonated deeply. This led to the creation of the Reclaim Your Life retreats, hosted exclusively at the Ocean View Resort. These retreats offered a unique blend of luxury accommodations, therapeutic counseling, legal consultations for those seeking justice, and invaluable peer support groups for seniors who had experienced abuse or neglect. The very dining room where Julian and Cassie had planned Ellie's final humiliation, the opulent Sunset Terrace, was transformed. It became a place of healing, where vulnerable seniors shared their stories, found solace, and began to reclaim their dignity in lives. 2 years after that fateful dinner, as Ellie sat in her office, reviewing applications for the Vance Foundation's scholarship program, a familiar name caught her eye. Owen Vance, her grandson, now 13, was applying for a summer program focusing on entrepreneurship. Ellie's hand trembled slightly as she pulled out his accompanying essay. It was remarkably mature, insightful, and heartfelt. "I know my parents did terrible things to you, Grandma," Owen had written, "and I'm really sorry for how we acted. I want to be the kind of person who builds things instead of tearing them down, like you did with your businesses and this foundation." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, a dam breaking after years of quiet longing. She picked up the phone, her fingers fumbling slightly, and dialed the number on the application. When Owen answered, his voice tentative, Ellie's own voice broke. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I have wanted to talk to you every single day for the past 2 years." They talked for 3 hours, a deluge of unspoken words, of hurt and longing, finally flowing freely. Owen shared about his parents' messy divorce, his father Julian's descent into a quiet, almost constant regret, and Lily's budding questions about their estranged grandmother. When Owen, with a tremor of hope in his voice, asked if he could visit her at the resort, Ellie said yes, without a moment's hesitation. Owen's visit was one of the happiest days of Ellie's life. He was a bright, curious boy, no longer glued to a tablet, but eager to explore. They walked the beach, toured the resort, and spent hours talking. Ellie shared stories of his grandfather, Richard, a man Owen had never known, and spoke about the intricacies of building her business from the ground up, subtly hinting that this could one day be his legacy, should he choose it. Owen, humbled and earnest, looked at her with genuine admiration. "Grandma," he said, his young voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry we hurt you. I know I was just a kid, but I should have known better." Ellie hugged him tightly, the embrace a balm to both their souls. "You were exactly the kid you were supposed to be, Owen. None of this was your fault." 5 years later, Ellie, now 77, woke up in her penthouse suite, a serene smile on her face. Her life was full, rich, and meaningful. Owen, now 18, visited every weekend, spending his time working diligently at the Vance Foundation, learning the ropes, his youthful energy breathing new life into the organization. Lily, now 15, had started calling occasionally, hesitant conversations that were slowly, tentatively, building a bridge between them. On her 77th birthday, a card arrived. It was from Julian. A simple, yet profoundly genuine apology letter, expressing deep remorse for his actions and a tentative hope for reconciliation. Ellie reread it several times, a thoughtful expression on her face. The wound was deep, but time and genuine effort could, perhaps, begin to heal it. She was still considering her response. Cassie, on the other hand, had moved away, remarried, and never contacted Ellie or the children again. Ellie, looking out at the peaceful ocean, simply deemed it for the best. Ellie had learned a profound truth through her ordeal. You teach people how to treat you. By finally setting boundaries, by reclaiming her voice and her power, she had not just found justice, but something far more valuable. Respect, peace, and genuine happiness. She had built an empire from nothing, but in the end, her greatest legacy was the family she chose, the dedicated individuals at her foundation, the seniors she helped, and the grandchildren who, against all odds, were finding their way back to her. The family you choose, she realized, is often stronger, and certainly more loving, than the family you're born into.